Welcome to the Bounce Back Generation podcast, where we create and share tools that help build emotional strength and resilience. I'm Jennifer Dillon. I'm the founder of Bounce Back Generation, and our nonprofit serves young people who are living in high stress conditions and need help to figure out how to navigate this crazy life that we all live in. So today we're going to talk about a really serious subject, and that is what happens when you call the 988 crisis line. We know that a lot of the young people that we work with want to reach out and get help, but are afraid that if they call that crisis line, that, maybe they'll call the police on them. They'll track them and notify somebody about what they're talking about, or that they just don't know who's on the other end and what kind of help they can get. So we're going to answer those questions. And the answers are very surprising. I did not know, for example, that the 988 number has been around for a long time and that they're not therapists on the other end. So you're going to learn a lot about how they operate and the things that they do. And it's actually a really great service. So two people are joining me today. Nargis Zahori Dillon, no relationship to me, but a wonderful person who is the executive director of the Alameda County Crisis Support Services. And she has spent nearly 20 years to make mental health accessible to as many people as possible, especially those in underserved communities. And she's very passionate about preventing suicides and doing that through reducing stigma by having open conversations about it. Also joining us is Zoe Eberl, and she is the Youth Services Program Coordinator for the Crisis Support Services of Alameda County. And she runs this youth-focused suicide prevention program called Teens for Life. And what they do is they go into the schools and they talk to young people about what to do if they are feeling like they want to take their own life, or if they are worried for a friend. And this particular program is extremely effective. And luckily, they have videos on YouTube. So if you're not in the San Francisco Bay Area, but you would really like to be able to use those materials, I will put a link in the description so that you can access those videos. We did this conversation right after the election. So we had a lot of feelings, and we knew a lot of people around us had a lot of feelings. So we talk a little bit about that. But mostly we just spent time understanding what is someone going through when they feel that they want to take their own life. And the advice and information that they gave me is really not what I expected, and very, very helpful. I look at the whole issue of suicide prevention in a very different way. I want to put in here, this is for information, educational purposes. So I'm hoping that the algorithm picks up that when we mention the S word, as we tried to do several times, or take your own life instead of using suicide, that what we're trying to do is help people. And this is for educational purposes. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. We, I think, are starting this conversation on a week when there's a lot of pain, frankly, and shock being felt in the communities that we serve. And I'm wondering if you want to start with that. I want to give people power. I mean, that's what we do, is that resilience factor. But we also need to acknowledge the pain so that we can move past it. And I think just jumping into let's just go get them or something is not effective. So Nargis, I want to just start with you. I know you've talked to, or you've sent out some support to your folks.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is like helpful to anchor me during times like this has really been like our broader mission of creating meaningful connections and knowing that the impact of a meaningful connection really can reverberate through a person's life and community. So, in my message to my team, I really encouraged us to remember that hope and connection are the pillars of the work of suicide prevention, but are also the pillars of getting through challenging times. And something I had read was that hope is not naive. And I think in a moment of, I think, widespread distress, it can feel attractive to think that to hope for a better time is is a waste, but it's
Mm.
not. And to think of hope as an active process and as a process of, if we can hope, and as long as we can picture a time in which there could be um, liberation for our communities or freedoms for our communities that they are seeking, that hope is what keeps people going. And this really lines up with when you talked about individuals who live in communities where some of their identities are kind of having to be hidden, or some of their identities feel unwelcomed. It is hope that gets people through. When you talk to political prisoners, it is hope that gets them through in really extreme situations in which they've lost everything. They've lost their freedom, their voice and values has been silenced. So we know that when we can have hope as an active process, we are really able to combat that sense of despair and darkness. And this is not to minimize the despair and darkness. People are feeling it, rightfully so. People are feeling like their well being is or could be in danger. However, the way that we move past that sense of isolation is through connection. And I think thinking about connection, not just relationally, but also thinking about it as like connection to self, connection to our culture, identities, community, nature. So really expanding our definition of connection during times like this, where depending on where people are listening or their families of origin or communities, they might be feeling isolated on top of feeling that despair.
Yeah. That was very, very helpful and very true in a deep level. And I love that hope is not naive. And I think the danger is in going to the cynicism. This is the way it will
Mm.
always be, and it's not. Zoe, did you want to add to some of that?
Hope is courageous. Yeah, hope is what's going to get us through.
Yeah.
However someone is feeling right now, it's completely understandable. And I just encourage folks to not try to handle what they're going through in isolation all on their own. We are a community, we're a country, we're a world who's holding a lot right now, and we can lean on each other to get through.
Yeah, that's right. And find that connection wherever you can, in your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones. I mean, I know it's common to say don't go online. Don't go online to places where it's cynical and doomed, and go find places where there's hope and there's sharing and there's love and connection, because that's what we have. So let's start the conversation about what we're here for, and that is to talk about self-harm. And I want to use that word, and maybe the S word, only because when we put things online, the algorithm will attack it if it thinks that we're talking about a subject that may be difficult to talk about, which is what we're talking about today. So I want to make it very clear, and I will, of course, in the introduction, so you understand what we're talking about. But if we can talk about it as the S word or self-harm, that would be really helpful. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's ironic that in a world where we're trying to like reduce stigma around um, suicide, I guess this part is going to get cut out, but like that we're not saying it. So like I get it that like the S word makes sense. I would kind of discourage us from conflating it with self-harm.
Okay.
I saw Zoe's face too, because like self-harm is its own thing. Like a lot of young people might have self-harming behaviors that are not connected to like suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank
you
you for
know,
clarifying that. Yeah.
so maybe I'm okay going along with the S word, um, as long as it's kind of, we're being clear that we're doing it so that people can have access to the resource.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to do is, and the reason we got in touch with each other is I really want to understand how the 988 call-in line works. We posted a video about a year ago with one of our content creators calling up 988 and just asking, what is it like? And we've gotten so many views on that because there are people who clearly want to call the number but are afraid of what could happen. So if you could just demystify the 988 number for everybody, that would be great.
Yeah, I would love to. So 988 is the new number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I say the new number because the Lifeline has existed since 2005. And I hope that that length of service really speaks to the fact that this is not a new service, but we're hoping that the number 988 will really make it easier for people to remember the number and for it to normalize help seeking around our mental health crises, or if someone's having thoughts of wanting to die. And so 988 is a national number, but the response is often local. So when someone calls 988, their call will get routed to one of about 220 centers in the country. Here in California, we have 12 centers. And calls are routed based on the county in which the person's calling from. And calls are routed in two ways. One is through geo-routing, which is the cell tower location. Currently, that's in place for Verizon and T-Mobile users. And the FCC has required that that go into effect for all cellular users by the end of 2026. So that will really allow for local response. That way, when you call, the person who picks up knows what the resources are in your community. We want that for people. But we also want you to know that geo-routing is not geolocation. We can't see where you are. We're not like Uber. We're not like DoorDash. We don't have any kind of fancy technology that shows us where you are. Our team is literally picking up the phone. But how the phone call is routed is happening on the back end based on cell tower location for those Verizon and T-Mobile users. For everyone else, your call is routed based on your area code. So here in Oakland, California, most people have a 510 number. But if, let's say, they move to go live with a family member in Nevada, if they call currently, their call will probably come to us in Oakland because they still have a 510 number. So it's not perfect, but the system is moving toward better routing that really gets people more localized response. We know people love to have local response. So
So,
that's about where the calls go. What would you like to know next?
well, one of the questions that came up quite a bit was if I call and I say that, I really am thinking about, unaliving myself, that the police are going to show up at my door.
Yeah, I think that's a very common misconception, and it really becomes a barrier to people reaching out
Hmm.
because to think, and I think some of that comes from maybe having used 911. 911 calls often end in a response, right? An in-person response. 98+% of 988 calls end on the phone.
Mm.
So less than 2% of the calls, and this is not just my center, nationwide, less than 2% of the calls to 988 require a response. A response happens when there's a medical emergency,
Hmm.
when the person on the other side of the phone is really unable to be safe beyond the phone call. And that might mean that they might have already taken actions to take their life, and therefore the counselor is having to send emergency personnel to support them in that moment. But aside from those less than 2%, where there's an imminent danger to the caller, all other calls are resolved on the phone.
Wow, that's good to know. Um,
Can
I'm
I
trying
tell
to,
you about another common misconception?
yes.
Which is that you have to be thinking about dying to call. Less than 10% of our calls is by people who are thinking about taking their life. So the other 90% of people are having a bad day.
Mm.
Various ranges of a bad day: anxiety, depression, fight in the house, violence in the community, something happened at school, broke up with a significant other. Nothing is too small. If you're feeling distressed, that's good enough for us. So, really, I want people to not be waiting for that moment of emotional crisis. We're here for all the things before it as well.
So if I was feeling really bad and I felt like there's nobody I can talk to about this, I'll worry people or they won't understand or whatever, I can just pick up the phone and call 988 and have somebody talk to me.
Yeah, you could
Oh,
also text it. We know who
oh, and
your
the
viewers
texting.
are.
Mhm.
You could also text it.
That is great. Okay. Um, so what what are is there anything else about the 988 that you think that people should know before we move on to talk a little bit more about what leads people to thinking about taking their life?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is you're not going to be the only one to use it. We had over 5 million callers to 988 last year. So a lot of people are feeling the distress and a lot of people are using the line. And the other thing is, most of the people on the line are individuals who've had their own past experiences with mental health. At our center, over 85% of our staff and volunteers say that they've had their own past mental health challenges. So I really want you to know that like the thing you're going through, even though it feels so like you're the only one, not only there's other people asking for help out there, but even the helpers have been in that spot before.
That is so good to know because I think the one of the misconceptions is it's kind of a therapist there. And it's
No,
just it's a person who's really going to understand you and where you're coming from.
yeah,
One
trained counselors.
one thing I used 988 a couple of years ago, maybe a little less, but we somebody that I'm close to is on methadone maintenance. And we were going on a trip and he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to get his methadone.
Hmm.
And I called 988 to learn about what were the places where he would be able to go with the plan that he had and everything to get the methadone maintenance. So there it was, and it was like, who knew? And they were great. They gave me a list, they texted it to me, the phone call and the website and everything. It was really very, very helpful. And I felt like they were just really nice people who were non-judgmental and kind. And yeah. So let's talk a little bit more um, about the thinking process that leads someone or what you understand about taking your own life. And I want to start by saying that I have an experience personally with somebody who very close to me taking their life. And it was my best friend. We were friends from the time we were in eighth grade. And in when I was 34 and she was 35, she committed suicide, and we'll bleep that out if needed. And I think about her every single day and what could I have done, if anything? She had clearly some mental illness, but also was abused by her father her whole life. And of course, as a young person, I didn't realize it until probably we were in college and it kind of I understood everything and the pain and suffering she went through and the way that she did it were just horrific. And so you leave a lot behind for people to process. Um, but less I'm worried less about how I feel and just the thought every day of the kind of pain she went through. Really, it hurts to think about that. And I'm wondering if you want to share anything about what got you into this work and how you look at this subject matter, which is so intensely personal, but also affects so many people.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your own personal experience. Before we talk about our personal experience, I wanted to ask Zoe if she wanted to chime in on what might a young person be like thinking about or going through when they are considering taking their own life, and what are some ways that the people around them could step in? Because I heard you say, Jennifer, that you wondered if there was something you could have done, and I think
Mhm.
that's the feeling that a lot of people are left with.
Yeah. First of all, I want to just validate the curiosity of wondering why. Like, why do some people have thoughts of ending their life? Why do some people end their own life? I think just as human beings, it's very natural for us to understand the whys behind things, and we want to understand things and intellectualize them and put things into boxes because that's how we feel like, we can conquer something or understand or handle something. Around this topic, even though the curiosity is so understandable, when we're talking and thinking about being a helper and being a connector to support, understanding an individual's why or understanding the risk factors is actually maybe not so super important when it comes to connecting that person to help. Obviously, the why is maybe going to be more relevant in the context of professional help seeking. So certainly somebody may explore their own personal why in kind of, a professional environment, like when speaking to a therapist, for example. But when we're talking about friends helping friends, loved ones helping loved ones, we actually don't need to understand the why in order to offer compassion. So anyone can experience thoughts of ending their life. And as you and Nargis are speaking to, sometimes it is related to internal experiences, like related to mental health challenges, for example. But it's also true that sometimes people have these thoughts and feelings and they're not going through a mental health challenge. Maybe it's something else that's happening in their life. Maybe not internally, maybe externally around them. There are many things that exist in our world that can cause a sense of distress, overwhelm, unbearable pain. Often, when a person is thinking about suicide, I'll say that again in case we need to edit it. It's so uncommon for me to veer away from that word because in our classroom presentations, Teens for Life, which we give in Alameda County, we speak very directly about this stuff. We don't talk around it because we know that being direct is something that reduces stigma and increases likelihood that people will talk and share about their experiences.
Right.
Ultimately get connected to help. But so I'll say that again. When somebody is thinking about ending their life, it is not as simple as that person physically wants to be dead or physically wants their life to be over. It's that they are looking for something within their control or within their power that they can do to change how they feel, to feel relief or to feel better with what they're experiencing. And so I think when we reduce it down to that level of understanding, reducing it down to this is someone who is in pain, it's very easy to have compassion for someone and to reach out and offer that help. Even if we don't get it, even if we've never been through that, we know what it is to experience pain. And we know that pain that exists for a long time for somebody starts to feel unbearable. It's very natural for someone to be looking for ways to feel differently or better. And so we can kind of pause there if it's helpful, or we can also start talking about some of the warning signs that people can be aware of so that they can kind of determine when it might be appropriate to offer help to somebody. How does that
Yeah,
sound? You want
yeah,
to launch into it?
let's do that.
Cool. Let's talk about warning signs. So there are many different warning signs that we can learn about. Basically, there are lots of opportunities for us to notice types of changes in a friend or a loved one and then be able to offer help. So we can think about warning signs in a few different categories: feelings, actions, expressions. And thinking about what a warning sign is and how to kind of respond to it, we can think of it as kind of like smelling smoke. So if we smell smoke, like suddenly we're in our home and we smell smoke somewhere, we might wonder, oh, well, is there a fire
Mhm.
somewhere? Or we might also wonder, well, did Matt just throw some stuff on the barbecue? Or, maybe did Zoe burn dinner? A warning sign, smelling smoke can mean many different things, but the safe thing to do, the safest thing to do is to take what we're noticing seriously and kind of look into it and to investigate it. So when we talk about the ways that a person might be feeling, they can include, but they're absolutely not limited to feelings like hopelessness, loneliness, a sense of not belonging, feeling like they are a burden to others, feeling like their life has no meaning or maybe purpose or worth. And people might experience all of these things, some of these feelings, other feelings differently entirely. But what it all comes back to is what we were just talking about, which is that this is a type of pain that someone's experiencing. And they're looking for a way to change the way they feel and to feel differently. They feel stuck or they feel trapped in the situation that they're in. And we can notice this stuff in different ways because some people are very direct. They say, I feel hopeless, or I feel worthless, or I'm in a lot of pain lately. But not everyone does. Sometimes people speak more indirectly about themselves or about their life. So things that we might hear somebody say, these expressions that kind of let us know someone's feeling these ways, are things like, what's the point in trying? Things are never going to change. I hate the way that I feel. And when somebody is feeling these ways for an extended period of time, it makes sense that it moves from being fully internal to showing up with actions and behaviors in their day-to-day life. So some actions that we can also pay attention to that are warning signs are things like sudden withdrawal from activities, from friends, from relationships, drastic changes in a person's mood. And so, if someone's feeling these ways, if somebody's life has changed in these really challenging and painful ways, it absolutely makes sense that they are looking for a way to feel different and they're looking for a way to feel better. So, another type of warning sign that we can notice in terms of behaviors is if we're noticing people reaching for some of these risky or unsafe self-soothing methods.
Mm.
So, substance use is one example of that. Self-harm is another example of that. Reckless behavior potentially is what we'll notice. One example of reckless behavior could be that a person is picking fights, for example. So we're using that smelling smoke analogy here. It's like, I'm noticing that. I wonder what it is that's going on. The truth is, many different things could be happening for a person if we're noticing those changes. But there are two warning signs in particular that I'd like to emphasize that let us know it's appropriate to be concerned more about like a person's immediate life or immediate safety. So to use that smelling smoke analogy, these two are more like seeing smoke or even seeing flames. So more of a clear indication that this is happening for a person. And we want to, right? Safety, we want to respond quickly to that situation. The first of those two is if we notice a person is preparing for death. So they may be doing that literally by planning where, when, how they would end their life. They may be preparing indirectly by giving away possessions, by writing goodbye letters or saying goodbye to others. So that's the first. And then the second is if somebody is talking about this stuff, is posting about their thoughts and feelings around wanting to die, or maybe around just like in general, the topic of suicide. We might notice like a preoccupation with a person. And so it's really natural that people will communicate how they're feeling inside, consciously, subconsciously. When people are thinking about something, it's natural that that comes out in certain ways. And so people may be really direct and say, I'm thinking about ending my life or thinking about death. But others, it may feel much safer or natural for them to do so indirectly, to say things more like, I'm so ready to be done, or I can't go on like this, or everyone would be better off without me. So those statements, they don't use the words life, death, or the S word, but it's clear that what's underneath that statement is that somebody's looking for a way to end that pain
Mm.
they're experiencing.
I think
And
that's a really helpful way to look at it, that you understand that someone is in pain that they don't have control over. And the one thing that's left is that. And so I'm going to let you, Nargis, chime in here. Do you have something else, anything else you want to add here
I
before
was
we
gonna
talk
say,
about what we can do about that?
yeah, I was gonna say like it feels like the one thing that left is to end their life. Because I think that's what happens when someone reaches out for connection or support, be it to a family member or to a school counselor or to a crisis line or a coach or a spiritual leader, really any kind of connection, often allows us to adjust our lens. I often see like these conversations as helping someone zoom in and zoom out in a moment where their own ability to adjust their lens is really impacted by everything they're dealing with. So sometimes when someone's thinking about dying as the only option, they're really zoomed in all the way and all they see is the problem. And sometimes talking to someone else can help us zoom out a little bit and see the bigger picture and doesn't make the problem not the problem anymore, but it might begin to make the problem not feel all encompassing.
But don't you
And
have to
yeah, go
like
ahead.
don't you have to trust that other people can help you? I mean, I think part of the issue sometimes that I've seen in people who have been kind of at their edge is that they just think, they get that cynical thing again where they just think that you can't help me, nobody can help me, I'm not going to even try. So how do you break free with that? How do you give them that confidence that you can be the one to help?
Yeah, I think sometimes I actually tell people like seek connection even if you don't talk about the thing that's going on.
Mm.
Because you're right that like that takes an additional layer of energy in the moment and trust that things could get better or that someone could help. But a connection, even if it's about an unrelated matter, could actually make people feel better.
Mm.
And that's something that we do know. And what that might look like is people have talked about just having someone come and like play video games with them or watch a movie with them, and they might not even talk to this person about their mental health challenges. There's a local author here, she's a national advocate for mental health, and her name is Kelechi Ubuzo. And she talks about how in her world, there are helpers and know they're part of her well-being because they're people she likes to go on a walk with, and that's such a big part of her wellness, or there's people she calls when she just needs someone to like hang out with or chat with or gossip or joke. And that to be a helper to someone who's experiencing thoughts of dying doesn't require you to actually be always talking about that. It's about showing up. It's about showing up and showing that person that they're worth your time and presence.
So can you repeat what she said? There's a helper there was a little glitch in the connection. So I didn't hear the second part. There are helpers and
her thing is that they're helpers who might not even realize that they're part of your they're contributing to you staying well.
Mhm.
They don't see themselves as people who are necessarily even comfortable talking about mental health.
Mhm.
And that doesn't stop that person from being a helper to her. So I think this is a really important takeaway for
Yeah.
anyone is you don't have to be a mental health person or know how to talk about this topic in order to really be impactful in helping someone in their moment of need.
Can you delve a little more deeply into the why it is that connection with other people is so healing to us? Because it really it's an existential thing beyond just like, oh, mental health, we need to connect. There's something else very, very, very deep about us as human beings that when we connect with other people does something almost magical.
Yeah.
Can you pull that apart and talk about that?
Sense of belonging is really considered to be at the center kind of our like quest as humans. We want to feel like we belong somewhere. And what connection does, even connection with nature, again, it's not only about interpersonal, it creates that sense of belonging for people. And that is the opposite of there's nothing for me in this world, is that I belong in this world, that I have a community, I have a family, I have an online friend. And that's why I think, at the beginning we were talking about like going online for people who hold like marginalized identities. Sometimes like a group of people with similar experiences on the internet, it's literally a lifesaver,
Hmm.
because again, the opposite of belonging is isolation.
Yeah.
The opposite of belonging is the sense of being a burden. So
Yeah.
that's why connection like really kind of helps us, even if we're wanting it to not sometimes. That's why talking like this feels good, is because it gives us a sense of belonging.
And the fact that you can connect with nature, with like, I don't know if you can see my big dog down here, Sleepy, connect with your pets, your animals, connect with your ancestors. I know when I was little, I talked to my ancestors all the time. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was always talking to them. And whether that's imagination or what, there's something about needing to not be alone in your body and your mind that
Mhm.
is so deep into what we are as humans. And when
Yes.
we ignore that, which we do all the time, and we also live in a culture where it's um, very um, admired if you are the lone person out there on the prairie on your, you're the cowboy, independent maverick, and all of that. And there's a value in that, but we I think we give too much attention to it and not enough to how are we connected to each other, to our neighbors, to our families, to our loved ones, to our ancestors, to whatever. Um,
Yeah. Humans are inherently relational creatures. We
yeah.
thrive in knowing one another and being known, and connection is what accomplishes that.
Well, and it's a biological need, you
Hmm.
know. I want to share really quickly one of the things that we promote for our people, our young people that we teach is 6 things that we say everybody needs in their lives. The first one is safety and protection. Then you need a one-on-one relationship with somebody. We call it your in case of emergency person that you can call no matter what you're feeling. Next is coping skills. You should have like a bunch of coping skills that make sense to you, doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. And the only rule that we say is it should make you feel as good today as it does tomorrow, because a coping skill can be great right this second and then you regret it the next day. Next is building confidence in yourself, and then is belonging, and then storytelling. You have to talk about these things. You can't live inside because it gets all jumbled up. And there's that belonging we all need, but we also need a sense of communication because it helps to organize things. So if you're feeling bad and you keep that inside, it's a scrambled up mess. But the minute you start talking to somebody who cares about you or is listening, it starts to organize itself and it becomes smaller and you become the storyteller instead of the victim of the story. So, um, anything you want to add to what Nargis was saying, Zoe?
Something I just want to add that is that if a young person is experiencing these thoughts or feelings of wanting to end their life, I just encourage them to have self-compassion.
Mm.
And to take how they're feeling seriously. There can be this tendency for people to compare themselves to others, their experiences or their feelings to others, or to say things like, well, it could always be worse, kind of minimize their experience in that way. And I would really encourage people to not minimize their experience. It is true that yes, things could always be better, but it's also true that sorry, it's true that things could always be worse, but it's true that things can also always be better. And if someone's hurting, even if another person maybe wouldn't be hurting over that same thing, the truth is that you're hurting and that's your experience and that's valid. And I just want to say everyone is deserving of help and support, and that everyone includes you as the individual, and that these things there is a lot of hope, like we were saying earlier, like hope is courageous. These are things that can change and improve over time, and even though everyone's individual healing path might look very differently, that makes sense. We're all really unique, different people who hold different experiences and identities, so of course that path is going to look unique to the individual, but like very broadly speaking, that path opens up for somebody through connection and not through isolation. So just encouraging people, if you have one adult in your life who you trust, who you feel like you could really be yourself with, be yourself on your good days, on your bad days, they're the right person to reach out to in this situation. And if someone's not sure who that adult is, or they're not around when they need them to be, 988 and local crisis lines, they are free. They're 24/7. They will be there to answer that call or answer that text whenever somebody is ready to share.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to remind everybody that every single one of us, even the people that you look out in the world and you say, what a jerk or what a a-hole or whatever, every single one of us are a shining, beautiful soul. And we have to think of it like, the pixels on the screen. There's a space for everybody. And if you're not there, there's a space missing because you make up this entire picture. And never think that you're less than anyone that's out there. And one other thing I want to make sure that we we mention is that sometimes you can have um, thoughts about ending your life that come from medication and biological things that are happening to you, that you need to go to your doctor sometimes, where the doctor can say, oh, you're taking this medication, this is one of the side effects, or that you have a deficiency in, a mineral or vitamin or things like that. So just want to remind people it's not always about your mental health. It could be about your physical health too.
Mhm.
Nargis, do you want to talk about how you got into this kind of work? Nargis, and then I'll ask you too, Zoe.
Um, I didn't really think about focusing when I was a young person, I didn't really think about wanting to grow up to be a therapist, honestly. I grew up in Iran, which is a country that has quite a bit of stigma about mental health and mental health challenges. But when I was in middle school, my aunt took her own life. And at the time, it was a really it was a big secret how she had died. And it actually wasn't until many years later, when I was in graduate school, studying to become a therapist, when it came out that that's how she had died. I began to kind of understand the ways in which her death was handled, to be connected to the stigma, and I asked more questions, and I learned that she had died by suicide. In the meantime, I had also lost friends who had died, who had taken their own lives. And when I went into the mental health field, it was with the hope of kind of to intervene and be there for folks before things got that bad. Really, this idea of nobody deserves to be in that much pain. And what would it be like if people had access to individuals who understand the layers upon layers of why it's hard to talk about your mental health or your well-being, be it that you grew up not knowing how to be, you don't have the language for it. Really wanting to see um, myself or people who've had similar backgrounds represented in the mental health field, because that matters. I think um, I'm not alone in saying that many people grew up feeling like this doesn't happen in our community, or we
Mm,
don't talk about this in our
mhm.
community. And there's ways in which that is reinforced through certain spiritual groups might kind of reinforce that might be a sin. So those kinds of conversations further isolate the person who is beginning to have these thoughts. So, really, stigma reduction and the power of saying the words and talking about it was why I got in the mental health field initially. And when I got in the field, I worked as a school counselor. I was a therapist in high schools for a number of years, and I saw what percentage of my students were really impacted by having thoughts of dying as the only option remaining. And that really spurred my interest in wanting to understand this more. And now, since for just over 10 years, I've really focused my career on working in environments where the focus is on reducing the risk factors, increasing awareness, and being a support for people who are really feeling out of options. I've found putting my energy toward this work being extremely healing and giving me a sense of purpose. If you think about the last 10 years, there's been quite a few moments in which people have felt like everything is just happening. And when we talk about the importance of feeling a sense of agency to people's well being, I honestly feel like doing this work is my sense of agency,
Mm.
being the ability to talk about the importance of connection, the ability to really make it okay for young people or people of any age to ask for help. That's what gets me through some of the darkest times, knowing it doesn't have to be.
I think it's important to shine a spotlight on the fact that we live in within structures that are oppressive to certain groups of people. And we accept those structures and the oppression and the suffering as necessary, or it's even religion or, um, patriarchal systems, for example, um, economic systems. They tell us that we're supposed to suffer. And one of my big things is I refuse to suffer for no reason. Unnecessary suffering is not in my, give it up, right? And so I think sometimes there are people suffer because of those structures, and they take it on themselves, and they think this is me. I'm not good enough. I didn't live up. I didn't fit in. And it's like, no, blame it on the structure and get yourself out of there, and do not suffer on behalf of an old system that was just meant to keep you down so that someone else could feel more powerful. I just had to say that. So, Zoe.
True.
Yeah, it's so true. It's why we expand conversations around this topic, as having there's more that influences these things than just mental health. There's this external systems that are impacting people's well-being, and I'll just say like ability to live every single day. Yeah, so I appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
Literally at this moment, it's threatening people's very livelihoods. Can you talk about the class that you were saying you did for young people?
Oh my gosh, yes, I would
Yeah,
love
how
to
do
talk
people
about our
join that, or how do you get into something like that?
Yeah, so our program is called Teens for Life. It reaches many, 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 I think over 10,000 students annually a year in Alameda County. And if someone is curious about how to have one of these classroom presentations, you can go to our website, and there's a request a presentation button. What we focus on in these classroom presentations, it's all focused around prevention and learning about ways to help friends. So we'll learn about some of those warning signs that I discussed earlier. And we also really empower young people to utilize skills that they already have within them, like empathy, vulnerability, compassion, and how to lean into those like innate abilities in order to create connection with friends and also be connectors to help and support. So we think about and brainstorm like trusted adults and resources that are already within their school communities. And then we also talk about and kind of demystify 988 and other local crisis hotlines and text lines to hopefully help young people feel a little more empowered, reaching out for that type of support also. And the classes are just so awesome. I feel so fulfilled when working with the young people in our community. They are so intelligent. They are so sensitive. They are so caring. It's like I get to go in that room and, highlight and raise awareness over these specific topics. But what I leave every classroom with, the sense that I leave with, is just like, yeah, but those kids were already, those young people, those students, they were already awesome. They were
Mm.
already like such wonderful, caring, helpful individuals, such good friends. And our work in the classroom is raising awareness around this topic and helping young people feel more empowered with when and how to take action. We say like friendships save lives. Like somebody might only have one friend in their life. I mean, I think I was that kid when I was in high school. I really had like pretty much one friend. And she's a solid one. She's around till this day. We're still
Mm-hmm.
besties. And
Mm-hmm.
that one friend caring about somebody and offering compassion and empathy and guiding someone to help can literally save someone's life. And so when I think about like what brought me to this work, it's that we spend minimum 40 hours a week doing our professions. And for me, it was really important to feel like my work had meaning. And doing this work, like I feel the importance of this work and I feel the impact of this work every day, and how just one action that one friend can take can reverberate in these like exponential ways throughout our communities and then like ultimately throughout our world.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be one person that says something to you in passing, or in an elevator somewhere, and then they get off the elevator, you never see them again, and they say or do something that is so impactful that it stays with you the rest of your life. I just want to reiterate, and so let's kind of put all the pieces together for anyone who's listening. So number one, you want to be alert to those smoke signals, the smell of smoke, the anything that gets you kind of, what's going on here? Be alert to that. Number two is to be there as a connection. And it doesn't have to be that they need to talk to you about what's going on, but you are there for them to be that support, to just, hang out, get a meal together, whatever, go for a walk, play a video game. The next thing that I think is so meaningful, it's not about the why they feel that way. It's about the fact that they're feeling pain and they do not have any control of that pain. And that seems like the ending a life seems like the one thing that they have control over. And so what you can do to help is to be there for them, make that connection, because it's so direly needed by all of us. It is a deep, deep, mystical, biological, physical, social need that we have to be connected. And if someone is in that situation and feeling those feelings, it's so important to go and make those connections, reach out, even if it's just to have someone come sit on the couch next to you. Anything else you would, and then 988 is there, and it's not a bunch of therapists who are going to say, tell me about your childhood. They're people who've been through what you've been through and are there to be a warm place to land and to get help and to unravel some of those feelings. And that most people who call 988 call because they need someone to talk to at that moment. And there's nothing wrong with reaching out to a stranger, because they're not a stranger. If someone's been through what you've been through, they are more connected to you than somebody who, may live in your household but has no idea what's going on with you. So
it's also so common, especially when we give these Teens for Life presentations and we give them the resource card and they learn about 988 and they're empowered as these helpers within their community. It's so common for them to then reach out and say, like, hey, I'm worried about my friend, or I had this presentation and it's been a couple weeks and now I realize, I'm trusting my gut and my intuition, and I'm kind of just feeling like there's something up with my friend. Maybe I'm noticing warning signs, I'm not sure. And they are leaning on our counselors as support for them so that they can also help their friends. And then I think that's one more thing that I want to emphasize, is that in addition to how powerful a friendship can be in saving somebody's life, we also don't ever want any one person, whether it's a young person or whether it's an adult or whether it's a professional who's in this field like Nargis or myself, we don't ever want to be the sole person who is providing that connection and support for an individual. The best type of hope and help and recovery happens when it's coming from more than just one place. And we also want to make sure that the friend in that situation, that they are getting help for themselves too, because this is a heavy thing for their friend who they're worried about. And then they can also sometimes take on some of that emotional heaviness for themselves. So we don't ever want somebody, I don't care how emotionally intelligent you are, how caring, how good of a friend you are, nobody should be handling this situation all on their own. That's one thing I wanted to add.
Very good. Very good advice.
I was going to say that too. I was going to say you can call if you're worried about something.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to the Bounce Back Generation podcast. I hope you enjoyed this information and found it useful for your life. If you did, first of all, please share it with somebody who you think really needs to hear the messages and the information that we provided in this 988 podcast. But also, please subscribe. It's really important that we build our subscription base. We are a nonprofit, and someone's making money off of our content, and it's not us. We also hope that you will find it in your heart to donate to us. That'll help support our mission, which is to help young people who are living in high-stress communities to have somewhere to go where they can learn more about building their own sense of personal resilience. In addition, please subscribe so that you can hear our next podcast, which is going to be about cannabis use. A lot of young people today use cannabis, and they use it as a coping tool. And there are some new emerging conditions and illnesses that are arising from that use. And also it can lead to some psychosis, but it also is a great comfort to a lot of people. So we're going to delve into the whole use of cannabis with an expert and really pull apart some of the myths and the facts. And we thank you so much for all of you who follow us and all of you who've donated. And we hope that this is helping you as well. Thanks for being here. Doing everything we can, and it feels good to have companions.
Yeah, it's like when in doubt, show up.
Exactly. Well, we're here. So
Yeah. Thanks for showing up today.